Today, we're going to compare Lightroom to DXO Photo Lab and see what's the better option, because one of them is not a subscription. You know, I started in the film days, and while it may be a lot faster to take photos now, things certainly aren't simpler. And what's next? Are they going to take these cameras and start charging us for subscriptions on those as well? We have to pay for a pack of photos or the camera will stop working. Maybe they'll get some royalties along the way. Well, I think if Adobe comes out with a camera, that might happen. People are getting tired of companies who always control everything, that we never own anything, that they're always gaslighting and manipulating us. So today we're going to continue with these comparisons, and we're going to compare side-by-side Lightroom to DXO Photo Lab. But stick around to the end of the video, because we're also going to be doing some side-by-side comparisons with Capture One and with Luminar Neo. Most people use Lightroom. A lot of you guys that watch the channel use Capture One. I have tons of experience in both those. I'm always making presets and styles and videos. So I'm approaching this from a professional standpoint. Let's talk briefly about the cost, because to get this, you're going to be paying, right now it's on sale, but it looks like it's around $180 to $230. Now, if you look at Lightroom plus Photoshop, it's a really good deal. You can still get Lightroom plus Photoshop for about $10 USD. I know a lot of times people go to the site and it tries to sell you the 1 terabyte cloud storage. Whatever you do, especially after all this recent Adobe stuff, none of us want to be using Adobe cloud storage anyways. If you actually go and dig, you can still find that basic $10 a month plan. That said, unlike Adobe and realistically now Capture One, who to get any sort of updates, you have to have a subscription now as well, with DXO Photo Lab, you can buy this outright. Actually, DXO Photo Lab is a little more straightforward. You don't have this whole import process and catalogs and all that like we do in Lightroom, and yes, even Capture One. You can see that even if I click folders that haven't been loaded before, it loads up these images, but it does so pretty quickly, and there's really no drag, right? As soon as those previews are loaded, it's very snappy, it's very quick. Now, it is building a database, and if you look up here in the file menu, you can look and you can back up or restore the database, which of course you need some kind of a database if it's going to save the settings and the edits and do those non-destructive raw style edit. Now in Lightroom, of course, we import and we manage and we have the disks of folders that we've imported, right? We see those in the disks, and then you have all these collections and smart collections and things like that. Now, here's the deal. The DXO approach, it's kind of spanning the gap like the old Adobe Bridge, right? When Lightroom came out, a lot of people said, no, I'm going to stick with Bridge, even though Lightroom could do a lot more because they didn't have to deal with catalogs and importing and things like that. DXO doesn't have to do that. That said, there's limitations, because if you use Lightroom and also Capture One, frankly, they have a really robust system for management. Not only, yes, you have to import in order to see the folders of images, but you can do collections and albums and things like that in a way that's very controllable. And if you think about Lightroom, since we're comparing that directly today, you can have smart collections that define certain types of folders, certain dates. Well, if you come over to DXO, the projects is all you've got. What I mean by that is you got this teeny tiny thing where you can add projects. There's very little you can do with it. Despite DXO users asking for years, you can't even do basic things like reorder images within collections, at least not that I can find. And actually, as a professional, basic things like being able to resort manually photos in a collection, not just by size or by file name, etc., as if it's a file browser, is very important. I'm going to be calling out things that I don't like and that aren't up to par with professional standards. This isn't a cheap app. This is a pro level priced app, and DXO has to pick up the game in certain areas, just like Luminar Neo, when I compared it to Lightroom, was lacking in many areas. To be honest, from what I'm seeing, I feel like DXO Photo Lab is ahead of Luminar Neo. No, not in fancy interface stuff and AI gimmicks, but in actual editing prowess. Okay, but let's actually edit a couple of photos to see what it's like, and we'll talk about the pros and cons along the way. It's worth noting that I am expert level in Lightroom, Capture One, Photoshop, etc. I haven't used this app a lot, although I have used DXO products on and off, going way back to the DXO Optics Pro area, which is what I'm saying is if there's a feature I'm criticizing that doesn't quite work, while I've tried to do my research here, I do welcome your comments in the comments section if there's a workaround or if I just missed the understanding. Let's think about the interface here as I'm editing this photo. I can drag this, for example, and change the size of the thumbnail versus the preview window. And I can switch around and I can quickly move between images, and it's actually very snappy. Okay, so this is good. I can adjust the thumbnail size here. Now, we are in library mode. So we have kind of the browser of our folders. We've clicked on the folder or the project in this case that we want, and then we can switch to customize mode. I can go Control F1 to be in this mode, or Control F2 to switch to customize, which is more or less develop mode. So in Lightroom, we hit G for the grid key and D for the develop key. That's basically the equivalent here. But there's weird inconsistencies. Now, if I drag and I want thumbnails, they get really big, and I don't have anything to adjust the thumbnail size. So I can have this thumbnail here and kind of have my editing window, which is fine, or I can switch back to this one and I can have some control and make this more thumbnail focused. In fact, I can drag it all the way up until the preview is essentially gone, because usually I'm using this kind of library view mode as an overview. Now I can be in library mode and double click and it opens up in customize or develop mode. I don't know why they just can't give these things the same name. It's develop mode. We're developing the photo now. From what I can tell, there's no way to customize these shortcuts, right? Now I had to bring this up, but maybe it isn't a fair criticism because Lightroom sucks in terms of this too, and you really have no native customization for things like keyboard shortcuts if you don't go to third-party plugins or stuff like that. Although there is a lot more add-ons and plugins and things available for Lightroom, which does give you some advantage. I should make clear that none of these apps are sponsored. They're not affiliates. I pay for them, and or in this case, the current version of this, I just downloaded the trial of that I'm working of, but I have full functionality with it. But these companies have no input, and I get no gain for you picking one over the other. The interface seems a little dated, a little bit hard to read. You can see, yes, I have a high-res monitor, so it comes out pretty small. But for example, I can hide the develop panel over here, as I'm going to call it, but I can't actually drag it and make it bigger. Whereas in Lightroom, I at least have some control over the interface to where I can make things a little bit larger. This is set up a little more like Capture One is, where you kind of change around the modes. So we have color, we have luminance, and you can see if I hit one of these and start using it, it enables that slider. So I have all the basic adjustments, highlight, shadows, all of this stuff. There's, of course, like most of these apps, built-in presets, and I can go in and I can apply built-in presets over here, but you'll notice that unlike Lightroom, I can't just mouse over. Whereas in Lightroom, I can go to something like Filmus and I get these instant preview. Then again, if you have this option enabled in Lightroom, it does use even more system resources. Back over here in DXO, so I can double click and apply a preset, a bit overdone, but it doesn't look bad. Most presets that come with apps are not the greatest. This is why I make the best presets for Lightroom and Capture One and spend hundreds of hours refining them. SeimFX.com. But let's actually look at what's happening over here. I've just put this portrait standard preset on. I can also click apply preset up here in the corner. And while this isn't mouse over, it does show me previews. So this is kind of cool because I can actually browse through. The problem is it kind of feels like opening a plugin or something, right? You can reset the photo, of course, from here. You can double click to zoom in, or you can scroll to zoom in. So a lot of very similar things that you would see in the Lightroom interface. As someone who uses Lightroom and Capture One a lot, I didn't have to spend a lot of time in DXO Photo Lab to kind of get the feel of things. Now you can see that we still have the basics like contrast and of course micro contrast, or clarity would be the equivalent of this. So you can do things like this. You do have other tools here. Let's briefly go through the tools. So we have color, we can do black and white, white balance, all the basic things. Now you can do LUTs here, and this is good. So let's reset this. And I'm going to go to exposure and just turn it up. Just make it a little bit brighter here. Right about here is fine. There's some LUTs built in that honestly didn't do a lot for me. And you can also do custom LUTs. You can actually see I've installed some of the Filmus LUTs. Filmus is the pack that I probably spend the most time developing, and it has a complete LUT pack included for people that aren't using Lightroom or Capture One. And I can come in here and I can apply a LUT, and then I can, let's say, do the 400H LUT, and I can turn it up and down. And now that LUT is mixing in, of course, with all your other settings, and it's pretty good. There's not a very good import system. I kind of had to import them one at a time, but once they're installed, they do seem to work pretty seamlessly. So for my viewers, for example, that use my Filmus presets, but you want to maybe try out or switch over to something like this, yes, you can use the LUTs and you can still get your film looks. Obviously, I'm still faster in Lightroom because I use it more and I edit and teach in it more, but I can quickly browse over and create a preset with this. And theoretically, let's say I put 400H on this, I can go here and I can go to DXO and I could apply a preset, or I could come over and I could do a LUT, for example, like the 400H LUT, and get a very similar look. You have the tone mode, you have the color mode. You'll see here that we have details. We'll look at that a little bit more briefly, but you have some of DXO's proprietary like noise reduction and stuff like that. Lightroom has a lot more in terms of layering and masking. And actually Capture One now with the new AI masks, even though it's not quite as robust as Lightroom, has gotten very good to the point where I've even made my elegant speed mask combo presets available for Capture One because I was able to. But let's say I'm in Filmist here, I could run this preset and then I could do a speed mask combo. In this case, let's run something from Elegance or this AI film retouch from Filmus. You can make your own of these just by making mask combos and then saving them as presets. And you can see that I now have this and I can turn it up and down and it's controlling smoothness and background and subject separation and all this stuff. If I come to DXO, we do have local adjustment options, and we see that because DXO bought Nick, this used to be Nick's big thing, is this U point. So it's kind of an intelligent selection method, but it's still not really an AI selection. We have graduated filter, we have control line, whatever this is, it's not available unless you have DXO Film Pack installed, which is something separate. You have brush, you have eraser. The only one that really borders on intelligent here is the U point one. So for example, I could click this and it's kind of going to detect, right? It's going to detect that orange sweater, and then I could say, okay, let's adjust the saturation of the orange sweater, the luminance, etc. And you can see that it is doing a pretty good job. But if I click and make another one and click, let's say, on our subject, so let's go there and click the face, you can see that it's kind of selecting a lot of things. Not only that, if you save this as a preset, it's going to save the position that you put that point in. It's going to save nothing intelligent like we can do in Lightroom and now in Capture One, where we can save these masks that, for example, generate AI subject selections. And when we apply that preset, like I just did in Lightroom, it builds all those masks and runs them intelligently. This is significant because what it's showing is that the DXO Photo Lab features for auto masking and selections are much more primitive than both Lightroom and Capture One. Now, speaking of presets though, let's say I've edited this and I like it and I want to use it on other images. Okay, well, I can right click or use the shortcut and copy settings and paste those settings, much like in Lightroom and other apps, right? So that's good. I can also go up here and create a preset from these settings, but there's a huge thing missing, and I'm giving a huge tick against DXO Photo Lab for this. I can't save any specific setting. Well, if I want to go to Lightroom and I want to create a preset, I have all these options of what goes into those presets, and I can do similarly in Capture One. It's a big deal for workflow. A lot of times people diss on presets, but things like this, the details of presets, actions, LUTs, these are key differentiators between pro apps and not. You don't have to buy my presets. You can be making your own. But if you're a professional doing sessions, you need automation tools, not just for speed, but for more creativity and for more consistency across session. So the ability to select what I want and say, no, this is a main develop preset, let's say, like a Filmus preset. But then I make a modification preset like the AI mask preset I just installed, right? And when I do that, I only save these settings. I might make a mod preset that only affects dynamic range. And if you use any of my presets, you see me doing this all the time, where you can apply a natural HDR or a silver or a Filmus preset, and then you go to the dynamic range mod and it leaves all the other settings alone, and it just affects those tonal range. If these apps want to be taken right up at the same level with apps like, I spilled water. But it's important that these apps, if they want to be taken seriously at the pro level, that they really start listening to this kind of feedback. Quality of the processing seems to be good. And you have things like HSL controls that you can customize, right? So this is really good. This is more like Capture One's HSL controls or the new HSL controls that just released in Lightroom. So you can then move these around, right, in terms of how they feathered, of what colors they select, and then you can have control over the luminance and saturation. You do seem to have to select each one individually, versus in Lightroom, I kind of like to use this mode where I have all the colors for hue, saturation, and luminance on one window. Now, the problem we have is I could almost do a video on any one of these topics, and I'm trying to do a relatively quick review, but let's take an ISO 10,000 image from the Fuji and see how the details are being handled. Okay, now much like DXOs, optics corrections are pretty famous. They also make a really big deal about their noise correction, and some people swear by it. You have these different modes. So high quality is basically just a normal luminance noise reduction. Prime isn't available for this camera body. Deep Prime is machine learning, and Deep Prime XD is their newer one, and it actually starts filling in extra details, I guess, using AI, which can go bad really fast. But here's what's not really clear. Let's go 1-to-1 on the image and look, and if I switch between high quality and Deep Prime and Deep Prime XD, it doesn't actually change that much. The reason is, on these more advanced noise reduction settings, you only get to see the preview here in the loop window, right? So it renders this little preview. So if you use like the compare button, you're basically just seeing the high quality mode, not the Deep Prime or Deep Prime XD. To actually see the final result, you have to export the image. Now, in Lightroom, if you run the AI tool, it does take a few minutes, but then you have that new DNG, you can edit it, you can do whatever you want. So while these noise reductions may be really good, it's actually kind of a huge workflow stumbling block that you can't go in real time and adjust your settings and all that kind of stuff. Let's go over to Lightroom though and do an actual real comparison. And I can turn up the luminance noise reduction, control the detail, and this is the manual mode, right? This isn't Deep Prime or anything like that, maybe a little bit of sharpening. And so here's a basic noise reduction in Lightroom. Now remember though, in Lightroom we have the AI noise if using the latest version of Lightroom, and you can do these AI enhancements on most raw files. But for the point of comparison, I've actually exported all of these, the Deep Prime XD, Lightroom standard noise reduction, and Lightroom AI noise reduction. So this first one here is Deep Prime. It's looking pretty good. It's a very clean noise reduction. Let's compare that to Lightroom AI. Now, arguably, Deep Prime is doing more noise reduction here. I would say that Lightroom's AI feels a little more natural, but I think that it's kind of a preferential thing because you are, I think, getting a little more clarity on the DXO in terms of sharpness and things like that. Deep Prime XD, you can see it's doing some weird AI things. I don't really like AI tools that are actually generating. Let's look at the pattern like on the jacket here. You can see it's not just reducing noise, it's actually doing a generative fill here and completely changing the pattern on this jacket. Now here's just Lightroom standard luminance noise reduction. And you can see you still have quite a bit of graininess. That said, most of the time, I don't mind this. I don't need an image to be pasty clean. In fact, if you look at Deep Prime XD, this is too clean and pasty to me. This is why I will oftentimes add some grain back in after noise reduction to keep that kind of filmic, organic look. So we're dealing with a very high ISO image. Normal luminance noise reduction is handling it pretty well. And then if you look at Lightroom AI, it's coming out really good. Here is Lightroom AI, and here is Deep Prime XD. So this is the more advanced version of it. And you can see that it's doing a lot more like sharpening. There's a lot more going on here in the Deep Prime. And I would say, of course, I could turn either one of these up or down more. I would say that it definitely is reducing more noise. There's no question. I mean, look at how clean of noise this stuff is. But I wouldn't say that I like Deep Prime better. I think it's a myth that getting to zero noise is actually the goal. Getting to zero grain is actually the goal. Film had texture and grain, and it's one of its beauties. I rarely print an image without putting a little grain back on, even if I've done noise reduction. So you decide which one you like the best. As I've showed in other videos, it's mostly a myth that Lightroom is not equal in terms of how it processes these raw files to Capture One and other apps in most areas. It handles Fuji files just fine. Now, before we wrap up, I'm going to show you a comparison with 4 apps, and I'm going to show you something really important to look for when you're looking at any of these raw processor editing type apps. I clearly didn't have time to dig into every feature here. What I'm trying to give you guys as an understanding is, can you come from Lightroom? Can you come from Capture One? I don't want a subscription anymore, but I want something that reads current camera files. I should mention there's also some kind of semi-auto modes like the Clearview Plus. This can be kind of cool. I feel like it kind of pushes the clarity up a bit high, and on portraits I don't like it that well, but it's kind of an auto setting tool. There's also DXO Smart Lighting, which is again kind of an auto type tool, and you can turn these on and you have a few controls on them. A lot of times auto type tools are hit and miss, just like you shouldn't rely on auto exposure in your camera when you know how to hunt and hack shadows like we talk about in the Shadow Hackers webinar. If you haven't been to that, definitely check it out in the description below, because it will change your photography forever. You have things like lens softness correction, chromatic aberration, and so there's a lot of really powerful tools in here, and I have nothing to complain about in terms of DXO's lens correction tools. And from what I'm seeing, we do have more options and nuances that you can get into in DXO for lens correction. But let's look at this final important thing. This is actually a test I do on any raw editing app, and it's one of the most important ones to me because I need to know that more than anything, the processor itself isn't screwing up my file. I would normally come in and run a preset and do some processing on this, but I'm going to leave this in its raw state for this test because what I want to focus on is how it handles extremes. And that extreme in this case, where things tend to fall apart in any of these apps, is highlight, shadows, and contrast. So you can see Lightroom is handling this sun up here and then the foreground shadow really well. And then we could, of course, combine that with presets and blacks and contrast. But you can see we're not getting any crazy banding, right? It's pulling out everything from the raw file. Okay, let's go to Luminar Neo. Now, if you want to watch the Luminar Neo review, I'll link it in the comments where I compare Neo to Lightroom in more detail. And this was actually my biggest complaint against Neo. It absolutely falls apart. The shadows are doing okay, but the way it handles extreme highlights and the way it just gives us this strong, like ugly banding, it's completely unusable. Now you might say, well, this isn't that relevant because I don't have shooting into the sun photos that often. That's not really the point though. We're taking an extreme case that it could occur at a wedding, a photo, a landscape. Here we are in this year's version of Capture One, and I can do highlight and pull down those highlights and shadow. And again, you can see that it's giving us, even with the extreme highlights, fairly smooth roll off. Now let's come in our final comparison to DXO and see how it holds up. Again, I'm just going to pull down highlights and lift shadows. You can see in this, we also have a mid-tone slider, so we can play with that a little bit. Actually, if I go over here for things like this, I find the classic legacy color space works a little better. I'm going to switch to that, and you see that kind of takes away those reds and it's not quite so extreme. You can see that we don't have any super crazy banding in this extreme situation. Here is Capture One, here's Luminar Neo, and here is Lightroom. And handling those highlights and shadows, I would say Lightroom comes out on top here. But I also have to hand it to DXO Photo Lab. It's handling this really well. To me, this was a deal breaker for any sort of pro use for Luminar Neo, and I'll be keeping my eye on Neo. Hopefully they completely revamp and improve. DXO Photo Lab, which is our focus here today, is handling this really well. But the features don't really feel gimmicky and over the top. There's room for improvement in the interface. Things like shortcuts, little annoying things like that are actually a big deal, like not being able to resort photos in your album. But its advantages is that it's very fast. You don't have catalog management to deal with. It feels very snappy, and it still has all these essentials. Are you still going to need a pixel level app like Photoshop, even if it's an older version, to really master your final print photos? Yes, but that's really the case in any of these, even though Lightroom and Capture One do have an edge in terms of how advanced you can get with masking. Does DXO Photo Lab get a pass in terms of being at a pro level? Yes, I think it does. The processing quality is good. Most of the tools are there, and you have a lot of controls and pro level features. Is it as good as Lightroom in terms of capabilities? Well, no. there's a lot more you can do in Lightroom. We didn't even touch on a lot of the other features in Lightroom that can be useful, like advanced export tools, like slideshows and galleries and things like that, which means the bottom line is this is an app that a professional could use to do their pro raw workflow. There's no point in having an app that you say, oh, I use this app because I like its one feature, but then I have to export it to Lightroom. I hear that a lot, and I never understand why people do that. You need one primary competent editing app for any given session. You might switch back and forth depending on your preferences, but there needs to be your primary app. From what I can see and from the time I've spent with it, I think it's a pretty good developing app, even though there's a lot of things that can be improved and some limitations. And I hope that the DXO team will take my criticisms with positivity and continue to listen to customers and improve these tools, because I see a lot of potential here. You guys let me know what you think in the comments, and if you like these comparison reviews, looking at these detailed side by sides instead of just looking at one app, you let me know in the comments as well. And of course, you can find all my other goodies and videos and blog posts over at seimeffects.com. We'll see you soon. Peace out.